Good afternoon, everyone. On a Friday, it's great to be back talking Ohio State football for, look at this, on the banner right there, 50th edition with these guys. We got Tony Gerdeman on the line on the top box from the O-Zone and Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts on 247 Sports. Kevin Noon floating out there somewhere in La La Land. We don't know what Kevin's doing today, but certainly appreciate his contribution as we celebrate 50 of these shows. Guys, how you doing today?
Doing great. Well.
Appears as though we've got some breaking news to talk about. Tony, we'll let you tee us up on the 2022 recruit that's come into the fold.
Yeah, I don't know, an hour or so ago, CJ Hicks committed to Ohio State. He's 6'4", 215-pound athlete out of Kettering Alter, which has sent a number of guys into college football. But he's like I said, 6'4", 215, 24/7's number 15 athlete, number 162 player overall. Plays kind of everywhere on the field as a young guy. Plays some corner, plays some safety and linebacker, and does some running back stuff. And just one of those guys you play wherever you can and get him involved. One of those really good athletes that can do a number of different things. As to what he's going to be in college, I mean, if he's already 6'3" or 6'4", and 205, 215, somewhere in that range, I think Rivals lists him as a safety. I don't see him staying at safety when he's already this big. But I think maybe the number 3 guy in Ohio in the 2022 class. So the Buckeyes are doing well in Ohio. He's their 3rd commit in that class. 2 of them from Ohio, 1 from Louisiana, Jair Brown, the cornerback out of Louisiana that they got. So right now, the fence is going up around Ohio in 2022. CJ Hicks is a 2nd Ohioan. Tegra Shibola was the 1st. There's going to be more coming because that's the way it is. And when they offer Ohio guys this quickly, this early, they do it because they want them. And so take that for an indication of how good they think CJ Hicks is, that he already has this offer, because they know when they offer these guys this early, there's a good chance they're going to take them. So they don't give Ohio kids offers this early unless they're willing to accept their commitments.
Yeah, very early. This is a year and a half until these guys that are in 2022, current high school sophomores, can sign a letter of intent in December of 2021. So very impressive. Hicks has got 27 scholarship offers as I look at it. Penn State, Notre Dame, Iowa, Michigan, Miami, Florida, a number of others. Kettering Alter, there have been a few guys come out of there before. I believe Jerry Rodzinski over 20-some years ago was from there, and I'm sure Kettering Alter has sent some other guys places as well. Jair Brown from New Orleans, cornerback, and Tegra Tushbola from Lakota West, I believe is what we discovered a week ago, offensive lineman. That's 2 guys from the Miami Valley there with Tushbola and now Hicks. And it also kind of redoubles the idea that Ryan Day is going to take the best guys in Ohio that he can get his hands on. In the latter years of the Urban Meyer regime, they kind of just took cherry-picked the top 3 or 4 guys in Ohio, and then took guys as they needed them and didn't worry so much about the state of Ohio. Looks to me like Ohio is going to be a little bit more of an emphasis, I think, for Ryan Day, and that's a good thing. Ohio State's best championship teams have had a lot of Ohio guys on there, and so I think you need a healthy mix of top national guys to go with the guys from Ohio that can be the backbone and those kind of things. So I'm excited to see what Hicks can bring to the table. And as Tony was saying, he can go across the board and play in a lot of different places for the Buckeyes down the line. So an interesting, intriguing prospect that they're adding. And again, this recruiting push by Ohio State continues unabated, and they just keep adding more and more guys, and there's no end in sight.
Well, and then the 2021 class is already 2/3 full, so they are able to get way ahead on the 2022 guys. And with all the coaches just sitting at home, they're able to watch a lot more film and do a lot more evaluation of film. So they're just going to get further ahead, I think. But then you got to be careful that you don't get too far ahead, and now you've got too many sophomores as part of your class, when you don't even know really what they're going to become as juniors and seniors. And then that also leaves you less room to take juniors and seniors as they progress. So, we'll see how many more they add in 2022, just in this spring and summer. There's certainly some they like, but I think you got to be careful that you don't get too far ahead. I think that was one of Mac Brown's biggest problems at Texas, when they would have so many guys committed so early. And then my theory is that it always just kind of led to a feeling of, they had made it, that they were owed this, and kind of didn't really have the work ethic that most classes needed. But that's just one of my pet theories about Mac Brown and the Texas downfall, is that they just had too many early commitments of guys who then didn't feel like they had to earn their stay. And that's why they became soft. But that's a topic for another day. I don't see that happening at Ohio State.
Well, when we launch our Texas Longhorns live series, we'll keep you in mind, Tony, as a guest.
It'd be a very popular theory on my part to start that show. Yes, that'd be a good idea.
With that, get it launched, with getting the fan base worked up. That will be the way to get that started. Ryan Day certainly seems to be following the Urban Meyer blueprint of locking down these classes early, because if you follow recruiting, and I'm not a big recruiting guy, but I certainly need to follow it and know what's going on in terms of the masses. There's a lot of drama across the country those final few days, final few minutes on signing day. And Ohio State seems to be, boom, we've got our guys. We're locked in. This is what we've got. Don't expect us to go grab another 4-star on the final day. So it might be a little boring. Not a whole lot of drama around here. But, man, you go through the other elite programs, and there's always 2 or 3 guys dangling out there. We may get them. Wow, we got a big win here. Oh, we lost this guy. There's a lot of drama where Ryan Day, based on what we see here in 2021 and even in the 2020 class, it seems to be pretty well like a week to 2 weeks in advance. Oh, we know what we've got.
Go ahead, Tone.
Well, I think it helps not swimming in the SEC waters where coaches move and change over there, and recruits do the same thing. I think maybe Ohio State's recruiting pitch is just a little bit different, and they always talk about finding the right kinds of players, but there is still drama at the end. You go back to 2018 when they lost out on Jackson Carman, and then between the early signing period and the late signing period, they went and got Nicholas Petit-Frere, who was the number one offensive tackle in the nation, if I'm not mistaken, in that whole scenario there. Unless Carmen was in 2019, but anyway, he's able to make up and go get somebody late. But you're right, there's not a lot of, waiting until signing day. There is some, but you have a pretty good idea of who is going to sign. Even when Ezekiel Elliott in 2013, he had committed to Ohio State, and then he kind of backed off, and then was still committed, but may end up signing with somebody else. And on signing day, he stuck with Ohio State, and that was after the signing day press conference that day. And Urban Meyer was like, "Yeah, we feel pretty good that we'll be adding another running back." And so, there was some drama there, but they knew by, I think, that morning that Ezekiel Elliott would stay a Buckeye. But yeah, I couldn't imagine covering some of these SEC teams where, things just almost out of the blue, where, some 5-star kid comes in and you're like, I didn't, who even knew? Maybe that's more exciting. I don't know. I think there's enough excitement around Ohio State with the recruiting that you don't need the blindside stuff coming out of nowhere. And then the accusations that may come from it. But I think Ohio State recruiting is dramatic enough. Steve, maybe you want more drama. I don't necessarily need some of the signing day stuff going on.
No, I understand. With kids, these are difficult decisions, I think, for some of them, particularly the out-of-state guy. I think the guys in Ohio may be predisposed to go to Ohio State, but Ohio State hasn't gotten every guy from Ohio that they offer. I mean, there have been guys who have leaked out and gone other places, and and done big things over the years, and that's just the way it's going to work. But again, they're recruiting at such a high level that if they lost one guy in particular, I'm not going to get too upset about it. I think in recent years, until they got the outstanding recruits for running back recruits for the 2021 class, I guess, a lot of people wondered about Tony Alford and recruiting running backs, but at the same time, they had a pretty good fleet of running backs on campus already anyway. Are any of them Ezekiel Elliott? I don't know, but at the same point, I can only get so upset about things, and then you just have to go on with your life. Basically, is kind of my feeling, and they have good enough players to win the Big Ten and contend for a national championship. And maybe if everything kind of goes their way, like it did in 2014, they'll sneak in there and win one of them here in the next 2 or 3 years. And that remains to be seen. But again, it's all about the material you put into the blender as the result you're going to get out of it. And Ohio State's putting great material in, regardless of, okay, maybe they lose a guy here or there, but it shouldn't be enough to stop what's been kind of a runaway freight train here for the last 5 or 6 years to just keep going, barreling on down the tracks.
Yeah, and as Steve said, it's not just one guy that's going to make or break a class, especially when we've seen 5-star guys come to Ohio State and do nothing. Like Dorian Bell, Corey Brown, just a couple of guys out of Pennsylvania, 5-star guys, didn't do anything at Ohio State. Go back to 20 years ago, Jefferson Kelly, #1 offensive tackle in the nation, had some injuries, and he didn't. Turns out he wasn't Orlando Pace Part 2. Who could have foreseen that? But we've seen guys come and go as 5-star guys who just really never live up to it, or take longer. And then you've seen plenty of 3-star guys be Darren Lee, and in his second year is crazy good, looking like a 5-star, and one of those guys who is annoyed about the whole star status. And so you've got those guys who put that chip on their shoulder and carry that forward. And then you've got the 5-star guys who come in who have to kind of burn that chip off because other players may look at them and a little bit of spite, a little bit of, they're going to be ribbed about it. Although with so many 5-star guys at Ohio State, they may outnumber the 4-star guys now. I don't know. It's pretty ridiculous over there. But no one guy, but there are some guys who can really set the tone for the program. Like Terrell Pryor took Ohio State to 3 BCS bowls as a starting quarterback. True freshman, true sophomore, true junior. Now they don't have him. If they didn't get him, and Michigan does. What happens in that scenario? Maybe Ohio State goes and gets Taj Boyd in like 2009 and they're okay. But, there's some interesting scenarios if you take one guy off of a roster, or one 5-star guy off of a roster and put him somewhere else, where those guys that did have big impacts, what if they weren't there?
I mentioned this, and I'll serve this up to Steve on a couple different fronts. One being that I don't think I put this into context here, and I'm sure this isn't revolutionary, but when Ohio State got the commit a week or two ago, that particular player, I don't remember who it was, but they were, in terms of the star rankings, were the 14th highest rated player in the class, and they were still a top 100 player. So the Buckeyes have brought in 14 top 100 players. You can go to some really good programs across the country, and they don't have any top 100 players, or they might have one, meaning Ohio State's 14th best player, theoretically, 14th best player is better than, again, pick your school, good football playing school, Stanford, whomever it might be, Virginia Tech, whomever, again. And Ohio State's 14th best player, theoretically, is better than their best player for that particular year. That, to me, just kind of hit me in the head. Is this puts it into context.
Yeah, I think that's what illustrates some of what we saw here the last year or two, is when they get out there on the field with an Indiana, they beat them 51-10. When they get out there on the field with Maryland, they beat them 77 to whatever. And so, is it infallible? No. they had the better team. They lost to Iowa. They had the better team. They lost to Purdue. So on any given night, something crazy can happen, but it requires something crazy for it to happen. So I think that, you look at it and 9 times out of 10, they're going to take care of business because they had the better team. The results preordained, but it's that 1 time out of 10 where things can get a little dicey sometimes, or you turn it over a couple times. The Iowa game, they threw a pick 6 interception on the first play, and Iowa never trailed. So, when you dig yourself a hole like that and create a problem like that and build a monster out of that other team and give them that kind of early momentum, that's how you lose games when you're the better team. So, we see upsets from time to time, not as much in college football, perhaps, as in pro football, but it is truly something that when you look at it, the way they've stockpiled talent, one class on top of another, almost makes them infallible at times, and yet not 100% foolproof. So that explains, when they outplayed Clemson 6 ways till Tuesday in that playoff game and lost the game, and it was just bad breaks went against them, a couple bad calls. An interception here, and just you put yourself in the position at the end of the game where you need to make a play to win the game, and you didn't make it. So you outplayed them the entire game, and you lose the game because of it. And that's just the way life goes sometimes. And Ohio State's been on the other side of those and taken full advantage. The other way around. So what can you do? And they replayed that Michigan game last night on ESPN. It was on again today on ESPNU, the 2016 Michigan game. And Michigan, if you sat down somebody and said, this is team A and this is team B, they'd say team B, the team in white, is dominating team A, the team in red. And yet, team B didn't win the game. And that's, a couple turnovers in the red zone, and that's what'll happen to you in a situation like that.
I wonder if you go back and look at the roster makeup at that point, what the recruiting differences would be. Because right now, the 2020 rosters, Ohio State has 21 players who are ranked in the top 50 as recruits. Michigan has 3. Penn State has 6. And the recruiting is just on a different level. I wonder if we go back then, I think it was a little bit more even then. But
yeah, I saw somebody tweeted out that they did that comparison, and they said it's the closest it's been since then was in 2016. It's only gotten wider since then. But yeah, they did make that notation.
Yeah, and the number of top 100 players, it's just immense compared when you compare the differences between the two. And as long as Michigan keeps recruiting Massachusetts solely, things aren't going to get any closer. That's just my another one of my pet theories, that if you put a fence around Massachusetts, it'll do okay against Boston College, but maybe not so much okay against like Penn State or Ohio State.
That big game with UConn.
There you see.
Tony, I don't know. We'll have to run the numbers on that and get back to you. I think
next week.
It's going to be close to determine whether that's a really based in fact comment right there. Yeah, 2016, the game was on ESPN last night. ESPN.com also ran a huge front page college football page article on the Ohio State-Michigan matchup, obviously gearing up toward what has been a throwback Thursday night on ESPN with Monday night football games and NBA finals, and they went the Ohio State-Michigan route last night. And of course, I'm stating the obvious when I say if Jim Harbaugh, you go back to that game and you're talking about, as Steve mentioned, 2 teams that were very comparable and a Michigan team that looked better if you just took the play-by-play, much like Ohio State versus Clemson this past college football playoff. And at that point, Harbaugh took a 5-7 team, made him a 10-3 team, and then that was year 2, and he was only 0-1 at that point, and it was a very understandable 0-1, and he comes within a measurement of winning the game, and then who knows? And here we are now 0-5, and it's only widening. And man, if it doesn't turn out for him at Michigan, that is going to be the game, the measurement, the play that determined his fate.
Yeah, I agree. And you think in that game where it did come down to that, but Wilton Spate fumbles the ball inside the 5. They had drops. They didn't make plays. And you see Ohio State like Malik Hooker making a play, Jerome Baker making a play on interceptions, JT Barrett picking up first downs. And, a lot of it is you just wait until your opponents make a mistake. Trestle ball, you do what you do and capitalize on mistakes. But the problem with trestle ball is if you made a mistake, now it's like almost like making 2, because you've played so tight to the vest and now you've made a mistake and you've hurt yourself. And I think that describes Harbaugh's style quite a bit as well. It's very conservative. And if you're not making the plays, you're not giving yourself enough opportunities. With no huddle now, it allows more possessions, more time for your offense to get things done or to overcome mistakes. And really what they've done doesn't really allow you to do that. If you make a mistake, it's devastating and it's hard to overcome. And, that's just his style though. And they didn't make enough plays in that game. Maybe one more play is all it would have taken, but they had opportunities, just like Ohio State had opportunities against Clemson. And, so many missed opportunities. You just need one to come through. The 2005 Texas game, Ohio State fans will give you, we can give you 15 different things that could have happened in that game to change that outcome. And, maybe those are the hardest ones to accept. And that's where it started for him.
The thing is that Tressel was playing that style of football after the game had been played like that way for decades and decades and decades and decades. And we were just kind of coming out of that. Mm-hmm. And sure, maybe he was late to the party or never got to the party of let's play a more up-tempo, spread amount style of football. But certainly they had their games in which they would do that when they were dragged into that kind of, the Phillip Rivers NC State triple overtime or double overtime game comes to mind, like in 2003, where they had to open it up and it was like this 45-38 kind of game. So they could do that on occasion, but it certainly worked for Tressel. Yeah, coming out of that style of play and winning the Big Ten just about every year and going to 3 BCS championship games and BCS games basically every year. But Harbaugh doing it in 2020, not so much. Todd B. asking about Marcus Bradley, defensive lineman out of Maryland, if we know anything in particular about him or when we can expect him to commit.
I believe he's committing today, and I think everybody's expecting Maryland. So another one from Mike Loxley, keeping some of the best players in state there. I think Ohio State right now, defensive tackle, looking for Tywan Malone. Top 55 guy, like a top 5 defensive tackle. That's going to be their next guy. So, or not necessarily their next guy. That's the one of the defensive tackles they're looking at. So I would expect. I thought Bradley was committing at 1 p.m. today, and we're obviously past that. But I expect he will be a Terp here shortly.
That Maryland situation is interesting to me. Nebraska would be the program in the Big Ten that I would expect. If somebody said, name a program that's playing 500 football for the past 3 to 4 years that could break out, I think Nebraska is the obvious choice to join Wisconsin and Iowa in that division. But Maryland, they've got talent in that area. They pluck some of them out. DJ Durkin certainly had a couple really nice recruiting classes, didn't do anything with it. And of course, then the program blew up on him or he had a lot to do with that. And now the same thing with Loxley, bringing in some of those gems, but I don't know if it's going to be quite enough. But it's just an intriguing dynamic out there as a member of the Big Ten, Steve.
Yeah, and the issue was the first impression wasn't all that great this past year. And, some of their better players, like the 2 running backs, McFarland and Leak, went pro. The quarterback from Virginia Tech didn't do very well last season. So they're kind of facing an uphill grind this year. it would be wonderful if they could find a way to get the 6 wins and get to a bowl game this coming year. But I'm not sure the games are there for that to happen. So I guess I'd like to see how they're going to go about it. But he's got to keep the best players in that DMV area. Northern Virginia has a few. Maryland and the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. areas have been outstanding. Keep those best players at home one way or the other and find a way to make it work. So I'm interested to see, he's been known as a great recruiter over the years. Can he mine some talent there on the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic region, and get some of those guys, even down in the Carolinas, to go to Maryland who can be difference makers? And, one of the things that the Big Ten expansion to the East Coast with Rutgers and Maryland has helped is we're seeing more and more Big Ten signees going to all the schools from that East Coast region. And I think that is because the familiarity. They can turn the TV on every week and watch Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, all these. They've kind of been opened up to a better brand of football, so to speak. Other than Clemson, the ACC, everything you see in the Big Ten is far superior, by and large, to what you're going to see in a typical ACC game. So I think they're seeing, Michigan in a new light, Michigan State, Penn State, some of these other programs, and they're starting to go into the East Coast. So I think that's been a positive. And Ohio State has certainly gone out there and taken its share over the years. Jeremy Ruckert from the East Coast, is a big deal. Obviously, Haskins and Young from Maryland turned out to be, top of the line guys for Ohio State. So, I just look at it and, we like to complain and poke fun and these kind of things, but there have been a few positives that have come out of it. And not to mention, as I will tweet until the end of time, Ohio State was in that leaders division with Purdue and Illinois, and we had been sentenced to every other year trips to Champaign and West Lafayette until the end of time, and we traded those in for every other year trips to Washington, D.C. and New York City. So I think we came out ahead on that deal 100%. So I'm not too broken up about it.
I do wonder what is the best that you can do at Maryland? Is it third?
It's going to be tougher in the Big Ten than it ever was in the ACC, where Friedgen could get to 8, 9, 10 wins fairly, I wouldn't say easily, but it was within reach. I think at Maryland, the high water mark is probably going to be 8, and you're going to have to hustle to do that because you're going to have to beat Penn State, Michigan State, somebody of that ilk you're guaranteed, 4 losses right off the jump in your division, unless you jump up and beat Michigan State one year. So, it's tough. I think 8 wins is the high water mark, but what you have is you're creating events. And so when Ohio State comes to town, theoretically, it's a bigger deal than anything they ever had with the ACC. And, I look at it like that. And so, in that 1 year out of 10, when they're in the hunt for the division, then, God bless them, they got to take advantage of it. But I think 8 is the high water mark. And if they somehow get to 9, then they have really pulled off something special.
Well, I think I used to think teams could try to be Michigan State in terms of Michigan State did very well beating Urban Meyer, beating Ohio State, the top program in the conference. So other teams could be able to do that. But what Ohio State does now that they didn't do under Urban Meyer is throw the ball really well, and they still run the ball really well. So I don't know if my theory of, if you can just be like Michigan State, maybe you can have a couple of those years where you are the best team in the Big Ten, or you are good enough to make it to the Big Ten championship game. Because back then, they would just have to stop Ohio State's run and then score enough. And that was really, really hard to do. And now, like a team like Michigan State or Maryland would have to stop Ohio State's run, stop the quarterback, stop the passing game, and then score enough to win. So I don't know if you can be better than first. You're going to, like Steve said, you're going to have to get past Michigan State. we'll see how that goes. That may be easier or more difficult because what Michigan State has now that they didn't have the last couple of years is energy. They've got some recruiting energy, and that will eventually turn, you would think, positive. Michigan doesn't have that same energy.
Yeah.
That's one of the things they're missing. So can you overtake Michigan State? Then can you overtake or be equal with Michigan on the field, and then maybe to Penn State? And that's a lot to get past. And, that's assuming Maryland can win their 3 Western, Big Ten West games and their 3 non-conference. And, you start out, if you give them 6 wins there, then it's, to win 9 games total, you're going to have to beat somebody that you wouldn't normally beat. And that's going to be a tall order for them. But, as Mike Loxley can recruit, we still don't know if he's a good head coach. Well, we still haven't seen if he's a good head coach. We've only seen him be a bad head coach.
They did beat Syracuse when Syracuse was ranked early last season, but Syracuse, as the season borne out, was not that good. But, give him some credit. And I want to see what he does as an encore. They really need that quarterback to come through and play well because he did not play well this past year. Regarding Michigan State, Mel Tucker was on the staff for probably 3 or 4 years at Ohio State and jumped off and went and did some NFL things and bounced around. And he beat Nebraska this past year when he was the head coach at Colorado. And this is what I'll say just in touch about Michigan State. As you mentioned, you got to talking about them and the thing that even though he, like Mark D'Antonio, is known as a defensive guru, as our friend Tim May would say, he's a guru as a defensive coach. He's not stupid, okay? And I'm not saying that Mark D'Antonio was stupid. He was just blindly loyal. Mel Tucker is not stupid, and he's not blowing this opportunity. He is going to put the best offensive coaches he can get his hands on that side of the football. Even though he's a defensive guy, he's going to find people who will put points on the board on offense because he's not blowing this. He's in the big leagues now as a head coach and making a healthy $5 million a year, whatever it was they had to get him. And he's not going to blow this opportunity. Trust me, my time around him, he's a very bright bulb, and he is not going to drop this ball. He is going to get an offensive staff in there to create some excitement within a year or two. If these guys he hired this year can't get it done, he'll blow them out and go get more guys because he's there for the long haul, I think. And, he's a Big Ten guy. I think he played at Wisconsin and obviously is a D'Antonio disciple, and he wants to make it the Michigan State, a championship caliber program. He's not going to settle. Trust me. He'll move coaches through there till he finds the right mix, and they're going to be dangerous sooner rather than later if they can get the right prospects in there on both sides of the ball to kind of, stabilize things.
As everybody out there can see on the screen there, thank you so much, Todd B. Hit like, comment, share the videos out there on social media, and help us here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. And if you subscribe, you hit the bell, you get the notifications, when we're going live. We're in the midst of a series realigning the conferences. We're going to go 6 conferences, 12 teams per, and we have addressed the SEC and our format thus far, and that includes a scheduling change as well. We take the scheduling out of the school's hands, and we format that as well. I wanted to get to this. Oh, Steve's.
I'm chuckling.
To roll on this one.
Are you mandating Texas versus Texas A&M and some of these great rivalries, the Oklahoma versus Nebraska that went by the wayside because Pittsburgh, West Virginia, all that stuff needs to come back, even if they are non-conference. And I'm just curious, out of your dropping your SEC from 14 to 12, who are the giveaways? Who are the 2 that have been exiled out of the SEC? Is Missouri one of them, or I don't know who?
I'd say they're rather obvious, Steve. They're rather obvious. They've
Missouri
gone
and
back
Vanderbilt.
where they belong.
Vanderbilt, Missouri, or
not Vandy. We'll keep them around. Somebody's got to
Missouri
get
and
around
Texas A&M. Missouri and Texas A&M.
Yeah, they go back to where they belong.
Yeah,
keep them in the lower Midwest, and
well, that gives them 12 schools again too. So I mean that it makes sense, I guess. Even though
Then
West
you get
Virginia,
somebody else. There's other moves to be made though in the
you got
Big
to put
12.
West Virginia in the
West
ACC.
Virginia
I
doesn't
think.
belong there.
Yeah, got to put West Virginia in the ACC.
Where are you putting Penn State?
Last week's show, nobody watches the videos if I give it all away right here. Yeah, we shake up the Big Ten a little bit, not in numbers, but in magnitude. Yeah, got to
I know
shake.
Michigan fans want to go independent. I've seen that. So it's then you can go to Indianapolis whenever you want.
As Dave Biddle would say, when Ohio State loses like a fifth string offensive lineman, or Alonzo Gaffney in basketball who never played, transfers out. His comment internally to us is playing time unaffected. Michigan goes independent, Big Ten championship picture unaffected. There you go.
Pretty much. Yeah, the realignment is completely football based. I take nothing else into consideration except for what is best for football on the field.
That's all that matters.
So
I'm gonna have the
speaking of
basketball people, yelling at me, but
1 week ago, we had our show posted right in the middle of the NFL draft. So we were one round deep. We were going into the weekend. So we don't need to carve through the 10 players that were drafted for Ohio State, tied with Michigan, behind LSU at 14, tied the Ohio State record of 2004. But more so, unless you guys want to highlight anybody, certainly jump in if you want to highlight anybody from J.K. Dobbins on that was drafted from rounds 2 through 7 there. But I wanted to get more to this narrative of Ohio State separation in the Big Ten, and then the national picture of the SEC and what's going on there, because I ran the numbers for the first 3 rounds, and it was SEC 40, Big Ten 17, Big 12, 12, Pac-12, 10. Got to keep the 12s and the 10s straight. And then the ACC with 8. That was through the first 3 rounds. And then the Big Ten had a lot of players drafted there in rounds 4 through 7. Made it a little bit more respectable in regards to final numbers at SEC 63, Big Ten 48. I don't remember the rest of them. They were in the 30s and 20s. But it does mean something, just like the recruiting on the other side. This is kind of the measurement on the back half of the career 3 or 4 years later, after we see the recruiting rankings, where Ohio State has planted this flag right in the middle of all these SEC teams, and it doesn't seem to be affecting Ohio State. But as it goes with the rest of the Big Ten, it's not real good to hear and to see.
Yeah, those are some alarming numbers when you think about it. On one regard, how dominant the SEC has been. For the Big Ten, certainly most of that's Ohio State, probably half of that. And, for that ACC number, my goodness, that explains how bad that league has been, with the notable exception of Clemson. I would assume out of that 8, that 5 or 6 of those were Clemson. So, I think again, all politics is local, and all, Ohio State fans really care about is Ohio State. They really don't care how good or how great the Big Ten as a whole or individually the other schools does. The point was made that most of Michigan's 10 came on days past the midway point of day 2 and on into day 3, whereas most of Ohio State's were done on day 1 and the first part of day 2. So it does kind of illustrate, I guess, the widening that we've seen between all these programs. But I guess again, those schools that had the higher draft picks, the guys from the first 3 rounds, they were better in recruiting 3 and 4 years ago. So that, again, it shouldn't be that big of a shock that Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama dominated the early portions of the draft, and LSU certainly, with the team that they put on the field this past year, was nothing short of amazing. So, that team, I think, that LSU had this year could match up with just about anybody, and it helped that the quarterback had arguably the greatest season any college football quarterback has ever had at that level. I mean, maybe somebody somewhere stockpiled big numbers against lesser competition, like an Andre Ware or something goofy like that years ago. But at any rate, yeah, I hear the numbers, I see the numbers, I understand where they came from, and I think that there's forces at work trying to reverse some of this, but it's going to be a slow change, I think, gradual change. And the teams that were in contention 5 years ago are still the teams that are in contention today, and will probably be the ones that are still in contention 5 years from now, just from an investment standpoint and a staffing standpoint. They have the best of everything, and that's why that gap just continues to widen.
Well, and I wrote years ago that when Urban Meyer came to Ohio State, he was going to bring the Big Ten kicking and screaming into the 21st century, and if they didn't come along with him, they were going to be left very far behind. And I think these numbers would be even worse without Urban Meyer at Ohio State, and he has raised the level of the Big Ten, and he's force programs to spend on coaches. And that was the first step, is get coaches to come in and stay. And then you build up the facilities, and then you can start, look at what Northwestern has, and all of these places have new facilities, but you're still trying to bring in kids from Florida and Georgia up to Chicago and into Indiana and, Nebraska. And that's why Nebraska is like working on a pipeline with California kids, and you do what you can, but you're still going to be limited by your geography. I think you can take all the draft picks and plot them on a map and from their hometowns, where they're from, and it will align with the SEC and, stuff like that. It'll be as much territorial, because it does make it easier then for the SEC schools to recruit these players, because you recruit your footprint first, and the SEC's footprint is outstanding when it comes to talent. And I think that's a lot of it, other than the fact that the SEC is the best conference with the best talent. That's just what it is, and that's the draft picks show that. Now there are coaches who waste plenty of that talent, which we all know, and that happens out west as well. That happens in Texas, another very good state for high school football, where so much of the players that go to Texas and Texas A&M, like, why? What are you getting out of it? What have you done? What has it brought you other than an orange jersey or the chance to play in front of people who yell well at Texas A&M and stuff like that? I think it's as much. I think geography will always help the SEC, and right now, the California schools are just, they're screwing themselves by not taking advantage of the talent out there.
Yeah, considering those advantages, the SEC on the field beats the Big Ten more than the Big Ten beats the SEC, but it's not an embarrassing number. The Big Ten is the one conference that can stand up with the SEC and at least make it very competitive. I think it was 3-2 this past season, and that pretty much bears out year after year after year. I did see something, and I started to research all this. So when those numbers started to fall again this year, and it's a 14th consecutive year that the SEC's led the NFL draft in selections. But in terms of high school hometowns represented on NFL rosters, Florida was around 220. California and Texas were around 180 to 190. Then there was Georgia, and I don't remember the number. And then Ohio was next, around 80, 85. And then I can't, that was the last state I saw in the list. And I can't imagine that the Indianas and Illinois and Michigans, Pennsylvania, I would think would be close to being next. Mm-hmm. And is an interesting tidbit. 1 out of every 76,000 people in Louisiana turn out to be an NFL football player. The ratio in Louisiana is pretty crazy because the population's not high, but they've got the best ratio of NFL players, but not the sheer.
What if you're a defensive tackle? Like if you're just a random person from Louisiana who also happens to be a defensive tackle, you're probably like 1 in 600.
Yeah. There you go. But I think that's always a fascinating topic for me, looking at the SEC and the Big Ten, and that 40-17 split in the first 3 rounds, I think was stark. I would guess it's more like 35-25 most years. It's decided, but it's not crazy 40-17. And then to Steve's point, to see the ACC at 8, and I think Clemson at 5 of the 8. In the Big 12 over time is at the bottom. The ACC usually does pretty well. The Big 12 has really been hurting for anything outside of quarterbacks and wide receivers in that league of being elite players. What the thing that hit me in watching last night's game is, number one, I could do this at any time. I can pull this game up on YouTube, the 2016 game, and watch it on YouTube at any time. Why am I watching it? And the only reason I started to watch it was people were tweeting about it. And I was like, oh yeah, this thing's on. And I picked it up at some point in the first half. And Tony, you made a comment a few minutes ago about maybe Urban Meyer's only slight weakness was the passing game was hit or miss. Sometimes it looked great. JT Barrett against Penn State in the fourth quarter a couple of years ago in Columbus. Other times, and this was the prime example of it looked bad. It was painful to watch. And I used to think that was just a byproduct of those two schools being on the same field. It's always going to be a bloodbath, and it's always going to be 13-10, and that's just the way they play football. But we've seen much different in the last few years. But the one Barrett touchdown, he comes back to the sideline, and you see this shot of Joe Burrow for an extended period of time because he walked to meet him, kind of slapped him in the rear end, then turned around, and he was pumping his fist. We got to see a good 10 or 12 seconds of Joe Burrow. And then to also consider Dwayne Haskins was on that team as well is just interesting in hindsight.
Well, Tom Moore, my cohort at the Ozone, and we did a watch along of this game 3 weeks ago, the 40-minute YouTube version. And you're watching, you're like, holy cow, the passing game was so bad. Every throw is a 50-50 proposition. Even throws down the line, the guy would have to turn, backwards to catch it and lose all of his momentum. And then you compare it to what it has been the last couple of years. I mean, it's night and day, the advancement. And that's part of Ryan Day. I mean, he had 1 year with JT Barrett, but it's also part of, these are NFL quarterbacks now, and this is what this looks like compared to what they had with JT Barrett, who is an all-timer at Ohio State. But Ohio State doesn't have many all-time, many NFL quarterbacks, elite players at that position. And maybe Dwayne Haskins will be that, but he was elite at Ohio State. Justin Fields is an elite passer at Ohio State. Those two guys are way above where JT Barrett was, and I assume Joe Burrow would have been eventually as well. But that 2016 season, that game particularly, when you're trying to watch that, the passing game is just woof.
Yeah, it's everything that you described and discussed, and even worse. And the thing was, the wide receivers who became veterans, Paris Campbell, Terry McLaurin, they were so young at that time that they tried, they did the best they could. You had Noah Brown out there running around a little bit, and they made the comment, I heard in the third quarter, that at that point Curtis Samuel had only had one touch, and that'll tell you how good Michigan was at bottling him up and stopping him from getting involved. And he was like weapons 1, 2, and 3 for that offense that year. So Weber was doing the best he could, but there was nowhere to run, and the field position was really that's going to make it look even worse than it actually was when you're backed up to your own goal line for most of the game. But thankfully, Michigan helped them out, with a couple turnovers. I think a fumble at the 2-yard line, fumbled snap. It was a young guy, Devon Hamilton, got his hands in there on it. I think there was a pick in there somewhere. I don't recall who had it. Maybe Jerome Baker. I don't know. May have come out of there with an interception. They had one to somebody else that had bounced on the ground. Maybe Fuller, or not Fuller. All the names run together. But there was a ball. It looked like an interception. It was called an interception on the field, and they reversed it. It was just an amazing Ohio State-Michigan game. Every, like Tressel said, 1 yard counts like 2, that type of thing. Every inch you got was important, and none, of course, more than the 1 or 2 inches that JT Barrett got that first down by. A funny story, I was in the interview room when that happened because I needed to file a story as soon as the game went final, and they had internet in the interview room, and I didn't want to be stuck in all the traffic trying to get from the press box to the interview room. And they had 2 flat screens in the interview room. One of them was the house feed with a camera from the 50-yard line, and the other was the ESPN feed almost down the line from probably the 20 or the 25-yard line. And my first view is the one from, because it was the one that was live, was the stadium feed at that angle. And I'm like looking at his back. And I said to somebody in that room, he didn't get it. And then the other feed comes up on the other screen, and it looks like maybe, his helmet and his jersey, maybe his hands crossed the 15-yard line, whatever it is. I said, that's going to be close. And they ruled that it was good, and then have the replay. And, Harbaugh, one of many things he was upset about that day, but I'd say it was probably the right call. To me, the closest angles that they had down that line looked like that the football broke the plane of the 15-yard line before his knee hit the ground. I mean, it was close, but to me, that's what it seemed like. So, and there's a lot of traffic in the picture there, so it's hard to get a clean shot of it. But, if that's what they called it on the field, it would have been hard to overturn. And somebody made the point that if they called him short on the field, I think that would have been a hard thing to overrule as well on the replay, short of, video completely of him putting the ball across that yard line. So, what can you do? Games come down to inches, and that one did. And, Ohio State won the game. And, the sad thing about it, just like 2006, is, Ohio State didn't capitalize on the big win over Michigan that year. They went out and got blown out by Florida. Michigan, supposedly number 2, was hawking for a rematch. They got sent to the Rose Bowl and got dealt by USC. And, this time around, 2016, Ohio State, I joked on the thing last night on Twitter, when they had 7 points in the third quarter, it was on a defensive touchdown. It's like, how, I almost want to say, how in the hell, how in God's name does this team get shut out by Clemson? How did that happen? Kind of in mock disgust, but it was obvious if you were watching the game, they weren't very good offensively.
Good stuff each and every week from these two, and typically Kevin Noon. That's Tony Gerdeman in the middle from the ozone.net, Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts on 247 Sports. And again, our thanks to Steve for posting these on Bucknuts, so you can get Steve's rundown as well as jump on there and obviously check out Ohio State football coverage on either one of those tremendous sites, the ozone.net and also Bucknuts. We talk Ohio State football here each and every week. We've done it 50 consecutive weeks, 5-0. If you've got any comments or questions that we did not get a chance to get to, please copy and paste them. You can leave them in the comments section of any of the videos. Join me on Sunday night at 10 o'clock for our call-in show and talk to me about anything concerning college football. And this is a very random note, and this is not being a good host because it should have been said 10 minutes ago, but I just got to say it. I think when we talked Big Ten, Ohio State separation, look at Clemson in the ACC, look at the SEC, I think actually Ohio State's in a perfect position based on the structure of the league and the levels, because the Big Ten still has great national credibility. It's still a respected football league. People still look at Penn State, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa to a lesser degree as a strong second tier, but Ohio State still has separation. So it's not the Clemson situation where people look at the ACC as a joke, and it's not the SEC where, oh my goodness, we've got 5 teams at the top 8 in the recruiting rankings that we got to battle with. Ohio State's created separation, but there's still great respect for that next tier.
Yeah, but eventually you got to beat Clemson.
Yeah, got to beat them at some point. And those two may run into each other a little bit more often here, as has already been the case since 2013 with 3 games in, 6 seasons or so. All right, Tony, thank you so much for stopping by and making this part of your work week. You as well, Steve. It's tremendous Ohio State talk here each time. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Thanks.
Stay
Have a good
healthy.
one.
See you next time.